Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Esri Canada Education and Research Group's presentation on 3D urban modeling with ArcGIS CityEngine. So today we're going to be going over a little bit about what is CityEngine and going through a bit of a demo about the basics of CityEngine and urban analysis. You can see here I'll also touch a little bit on procedural modeling, and I'm going to try to get in as many demos as possible because I think the best way to learn about a piece of software is to see the demos and to see it working live. So before we get started, just a little bit about myself. My name is David Kosofsky. I'm a GIS and urban design specialist in the education and research group at Esri Canada. I am joined today by my colleague Kendra Munn, who is an urban solutions specialist, also in the education and research group with me. We focus a lot of our work on 3D modeling and urban design projects within the department. So Esri Canada's Education and Research Group is divided into two different departments. We have the K-12 department that works with kindergarten to grade 12 that helps to promote and teach spatial literacy to teachers and students in elementary and secondary schools across Canada. And they ensure that the teaching content that they are creating adheres to provincial curriculum guidelines. In the Education and Research Group's Higher Education Group, you can see here we focus on three major areas. In the higher education main area of the group, we help to promote GIS in teaching and learning, which is what I'm doing today, where I help and a bunch of us go to different universities and colleges across Canada to teach about spatial programs, spatial ideas, and Esri GIS software. We also promote and support innovation in GIS research. So we often sit on research projects and research boards across Canada and provide industry expertise on different projects. And we like to recognize exemplary students by providing scholarships and awards to students and to their research projects across Canada. So before we go on, I just have a quick question. Kendra will be helping to moderate the questions today. So if anybody has any questions, just feel free to create a post in the Q&A there. But before we move forward, I just have a quick question for all of you to know what kind of experience you have with GIS in general. So if you can just take a moment there to select one of the choices and click submit, and then we'll see the results in a second. Okay, so quite a lot of you know about GIS, and you seem to be pretty proficient in it from our very informal survey. Okay, so that's great. So by the sounds of it, it sounds like most of you have at least some experience in GIS. So I will hopefully be able to move through some of the content fairly quickly. But for those of you who don't have the experience or the previous knowledge in these areas of GIS, please feel free to just ask any questions that you may have in the Q&A. And if Kendra can answer them throughout the webinar, she will do so. Otherwise, we'll take some time after the presentation to go through some of the questions in more detail. So you can just click done to get rid of that screen if it's in your way before we carry on. So what is ArcGIS CityEngine? So CityEngine is what we call advanced 3D city design software, and it's procedural 3D modeling software. So if you are familiar with other 3D software like SketchUp or 3D Studio Max, you're often drawing 3D models from scratch, and you're just drawing based off of line work and meshes and things like that and making adjustments. And once you've created that model, that's sort of the model in itself. It's like a static model. CityEngine works off of this idea of rule-based or procedural 3D modeling, meaning that everything that you create in CityEngine works off of rules. So you can make adjustments to the rules or to the parameters, what we call them, that come out of the rules to make live updates to those models that you see on your screen. And you can start to make what we call like iterations of form or different scenarios of form in real time. So CityEngine is really great at creating different scenarios for the built environment. I'll show a little bit of that in the live demo, but you can very quickly start to show, for example, development scenarios of as-built conditions, and then model out one of the scenarios and then change some of the parameters in the rules to create multiple iterations moving forward. And just like all other GIS software, ArcGIS CityEngine is data-driven. So even though it has a very strong visual component, all of the data has, or all of the models have a data backend, meaning that there is a data structure and attribute table so that we can start to do more advanced calculations and metric calculations and rules that work off of the metrics to create much more complex outputs. So CityEngine is used across multiple industries. It was originally created for the movie and entertainment industry before Esri acquired the software. So it has a very strong focus on 3D visualization, as you can see. Right now, today, the software continues to be used in the film and TV industry. It's used often by Disney and Pixar in the past, so it was used to create the backdrops for movies such as Big Hero 6, Cars, Zootopia, also Independence Day and the latest Blade Runner movie. It created all of the kind of large city scenes that you see in the backgrounds. In architecture, urban design, and urban planning, CityEngine is used quite a lot today for design scenarios and to look at different built environment configurations. And in local government and GIS in the military, CityEngine is used for training simulations, especially for those areas where people may be unfamiliar with different regions, and so they can be immersed in a virtual scenario and virtual location before people are deployed into the real world in a location around the world. So how many of you, just another very quick poll, I just want to know how many of you have familiarity with 3D modeling in general? So just another quick one that pops up there. So the reason why I've divided up SketchUp, Tinkercad, and Minecraft from 3ds, Maya, Rhino, Revit, and Blender is because the kind of upper tier of 3D modeling programs often work off of CAD-based design line and line work. And so they become a lot more complex in what you can do with the modeling, even though SketchUp can actually create some really fantastic outputs. So CityEngine in itself is a little bit of a hybrid between SketchUp, CAD, and ArcGIS Pro. So if you have experience in programs such as SketchUp or in something like Rhino, Revit, or 3D Studio Max, or even Blender, you can probably get into CityEngine and start using it quite quickly, especially because you'll probably have some more familiarity with the 3D navigation system in general. And if you don't have any experience in that, that's totally fine. There are a lot of great tutorials that CityEngine provides to get started if you don't have that 3D experience. So as a software comparison for urban design, focusing specifically on urban design, there are 3 major programs that Esri has that kind of work in these areas. So ArcGIS Pro is sort of like the main piece of software that most of you are probably familiar with. It's used mainly for analytical and visualization processes in the urban design and architectural realm. It's really great for modeling out global to local level of detail, so you can zoom in and out at varying levels of scale, and you can do a lot more advanced analytics with this. There's also a lot of import tools for different sort of data formats like LiDAR, BIM, and other kind of 3D formats and point files. And there are also a lot of add-on solutions that you can bring into Pro to create a lot more guided workflows. ArcGIS Urban is a web-based system that Esri provides as well, which is really great for doing decision-making and scenario testing related to urban planning projects at kind of like the city or more localized scale. So you would use this mainly for neighborhood or city modeling, and it's really great for doing impact assessments and metrics-based analytics because ArcGIS Urban has a very strong metrics backend to do more modeling and to get a greater understanding of the impacts of urban design and planning. ArcGIS CityEngine is a little bit, as I mentioned before, of a hybrid between ArcGIS Pro and other third-party 3D modeling tools, and is really great for making local high detail models. So you won't use CityEngine if you want to create very large scale, like full city models, because it will really start to slow down your system. But if you're working on creating kind of neighborhood or smaller city models, or much more intensive, like localized modeling of areas, then CityEngine is really great for creating those complex models. Of course, you can also use CityEngine for creating much larger cities, as you see in like the Pixar movies that I mentioned before. But generally, when you're creating those background scenes, you don't have that same level of accuracy as if you're creating more localized scenes as you would normally do in CityEngine. CityEngine is also really great for creating mid to high levels of detail of urban form and creation. So you can change the level of detail in CityEngine quite easily. We refer to that often as LOD. And you can also export into third-party programs, usually in a more streamlined way using CityEngine. And you can very easily export into web scenes and also to VR export formats. So as I mentioned before, CityEngine works off of this idea of procedural modeling or rule-based modeling. So rule-based modeling or procedural modeling means that we can create different iterations of form by adjusting rules or parameters. So in the diagram that you can see here, we can start with one single kind of square or rectangle, as you see kind of in the left-hand corner there. And if we change one of the parameters, for example, like division by 2, we can start to create splits in that geometry. So we go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 16. You can kind of like increase it exponentially. Numbers of parcels or numbers of shapes. And if we start to change one of the other parameters, being a height parameter, we can increase those values and increase the extrusions of the shapes by 10. So very quickly, just by changing two parameters of division and height, you can create 12 different, in this case, forms, or what we call iterations or scenarios, just by making those quick adjustments. And so procedural modeling or rule-based modeling is really great for creating these repetitive forms with different variations to test, kind of like to create a test bed of forms and 3D models, especially when you're planning them out kind of in the context of the real world. This is what CityEngine rule kind of looks like when you're using CityEngine. So on the left-hand side, you can see the scripting language that we call CGA, or Computer Generated Architecture. This is a scripting language that is not that common in the programming or scripting world, but it is used by some procedural modeling software and very much so in CityEngine. So the left-hand side there, you can see the rule and the scripting language. At the bottom of the screen there, you can see kind of like a visual breakdown of all the different sort of individualized shapes that the rule is referencing. And on the right-hand side, you can see the parameters that you can adjust, or those kind of procedural aspects of the rule. And I'll get into more detail of this as we move through the tutorial. This is what it looks like if we start to change the parameters in CityEngine. So here I have a simple street, and on the right-hand side, I have a whole lot of parameters that are revealed to me. And just by making some adjustments to here, for example, the bike lane widths and the color of the bike lane, I can very quickly start to create different variations of form of the street scene to create various levels of what we call street completeness. So here I'm adding in street trees. I can add in different types of trees so that I can create more variation. We can increase the number of vehicles on the streets as well as the number of bikes and people who are walking on the sidewalks. And once our model is completed and we've created a really kind of nice visualization that we want to have as our final output, as I mentioned before, there's always that data backend. And so you can see here that the visualization itself is one thing that you created, but the output has fed into a data system that is reporting all kinds of information about what you just created. So you can see all sorts of information about the amount of land that needs to be cut or filled for the trees that need to be planted, the different modal preferences of the transportation on the road now, the widths of the sidewalks, the number of people who are walking on the sidewalks. You can see even the cost of the green paint that needs to be laid down in order to create this in the real world. And so you can create all kinds of customized reports and outputs using CityEngine, especially if you have a better understanding or a bit of understanding about how to create modifications to CityEngine rules. You can really start to create any customization that you can dream of. In the latest release of CityEngine 2023.1, they've introduced something called Visual CGA. So for those of you who are familiar with Dynamo or Grasshopper, this will be something that's really nice add-on that you might be happy to see, because it takes that scripting language and moves it from the text component to something that's a lot more visually understandable from that kind of visual programming flowchart aspect of things. And so it's something that's worth looking into in the latest release, and as it continues to evolve in later releases, you'll start to see a lot more functionality brought into the VCGA kind of aspects of CityEngine's rule creation. So when we're generating 3D models in CityEngine, the way that it typically works is that you will start with a shape. That shape will be a shapefile or a feature or something that you've sketched out in CityEngine. That shape typically will have attributes associated with it. So for example, we might have an attribute that tells us that the shape has a height of 10 meters. And then we will assign a rule to the shape. And the rule will say to take the shape that you've just drawn and to extrude it to the height of the attribute, meaning that it will extrude it to 10 meters. And so the resultant form is a model. And that will be that shape extruded to 10 meters. And so that's sort of the most simplistic type of rule that you can create. But of course, it's a starting point, and that's kind of where you can go from how you can start to get a lot more complex. So if we're looking at street generation, a similar idea applies in CityEngine, where you would draw a single line. The single line, again, will have attributes associated with it. And so in this case, the attributes that I have created for the single line that you've seen drawn there is telling CityEngine that the type of the line is a road. There's a total width to the road. There's a left sidewalk, a right sidewalk, and left and right lanes. When you draw a line in CityEngine, it automatically understands that line to be a road with sidewalks. And so you can see in the middle line there, or the middle diagram there, that you end up with a center line with a road width and a left and right sidewalk. And then you can apply rules to that road to visualize it appropriately. And so if we look at this kind of in the CityEngine output in itself, you can get the idea that even just with starting with a single center line, as you see in the diagram there, you can end up with these 3 different resultant forms very easily just by changing a bunch of parameters. So the underlying geometry that you see in all of these street sections is that same single street center line that is driving the creation of all of these generalized or all of these generated 3D forms. Complete streets in CityEngine is something that's a really great functionality of software. And there's a rule base called the Complete Street rule base created by David Wasserman, which is free to download. I can show you how to get access to that when we go into the demos. But it's a really excellent rule that creates really complex and visually compelling street sections in your models. This is what the CityEngine interface looks like. So at the top, we have the menu bar where you can select all of the different tools that you want to use. On the left-hand side there, you can see we have a scenario manager where you can switch between the scenarios or the different iterations that you've created in CityEngine. There's a layer manager, or they call it a scene manager, on the left-hand side as well, where you can turn on and off different layers and toggle and delete different layers as needed. There's a navigator window, which is like a file manager or ArcGIS Pro's catalog system, if you're familiar with that, where you can have access to more of the assets or 3D components that you might need in your model within that navigator system. So they're very easily available in there. And CityEngine has its own file system as well, as just like you would see in ArcGIS Pro. CityEngine has its own kind of file system, and so it's worth getting familiar with the way that the navigator sets up different folders and different file structures in order to properly model out and organize your CityEngine scenes. In the middle, you can see there, that's the 3D viewer or the viewport. The default is to create a 3D view, but you can also switch it into a 2D view or to create parallel projections if you want to create architectural projections. And on the right-hand side is the inspector window, where you would be able to have control of all the different parameters in the rule that you have applied. If you're not familiar with 3D modeling systems, there's also different mouse buttons and control keys that you would use to rotate and to zoom in and out of your views. And so on the bottom right-hand side there, you can see those are the default controls for CityEngine's navigation system. And you can also adjust those to a navigation system that you might be more familiar with. So for example, I changed my CityEngine navigation system to mirror Rhino's navigation system. So it just makes it easier for me to switch between those two different pieces of software if I'm using them. So I want to jump right into a CityEngine demo because I think it's the best way to learn is to see something being done live and on the spot, and hopefully we won't run into any problems here. But this is what CityEngine looks like when you start it up. I've sort of preloaded in a scene just to speed things up a little bit because we're limited for time today in our webinar. But just to kind of very quickly go over how you would create a new scene is you would start up CityEngine and you would end up with something that looks like this. You would right-click in the navigator window and say New CityEngine Project, give it a project name, click Finish, and when you click Finish, you end up with a folder structure like this that's automatically generated by CityEngine, and that helps you to organize all of your rules and 3D models and data. The tools that you can start off with when we're trying to sketch things out, the ones that you probably want to play around with the most are the street creation tools, as well as the shape drawing tools. So just to kind of show you how things work here, CityEngine is really great for starting out when you're creating a 3D models with the street network. So if I click here to create a line segment of my street, you can see what I was talking about before, that by drawing that center line, I get the left and right side of the road as well as the left and right sidewalk. And so if I create an enclosed polygon of streets here, what CityEngine does once the streets are enclosed is it creates land parcels or lots within the shape of the street boundaries. And it does that automatically because CityEngine by default assumes that you're doing some sort of urban planning or urban design project where you're going to be modeling out streets and buildings. You can turn off this functionality if you're creating something that goes beyond this kind of scope of work, but by default, that's sort of the way the CityEngine generates things. So I can bisect the road here by just drawing, or bisect a lot by just drawing another road here. And you'll see it will divide the lots into different shapes. And I'll do it again, actually, just to go from here to here. And we'll just create a square grid of streets and lots. So the lots that are generated in the middle here, you can create different subdivision types. And so by default, CityEngine is creating what they call a skeleton subdivision, but I can adjust this to create something that's like an offset subdivision where you can change the offset width to something that's greater or smaller there. 10, for example, so you can see that offset boundary that's being generated there. And you can change a whole lot of different parameters here as well if you want to create more customized lot creation. But the great thing about CityEngine when you're generating streets and lots from scratch is that if you start to adjust your streets by moving them along the scene, you can see the lots start to adjust as well. So everything responds to everything else in CityEngine if you're generating streets and lots in the way that I've just generated them, which is really great for being able to create modifications of form without having to worry about redrawing your streets and lots to line up again. The other thing I can do is if I click on that street center line that I had before that I've just drawn, I can change the segment width. So by default here, my street width is 7 meters. I can change that to make it much larger or smaller. So I'm going to make my street, for example, 20 meters, and I'll give a left sidewalk width of 6 meters and a right sidewalk width of 6 meters as well. And once I've created my street segments and my my blocks for my lots, I can start to apply rules to them. So when you download CityEngine for the first time, everybody's going to have a folder called esri.lib that's automatically included within your CityEngine installation. And there's a folder within there called rules. So you can expand the rules file or folder, and you'll see all of the different categories of rules that you can apply that are built into CityEngine. So by default, what I want to do right now is I want to start to visualize what the street looks like. So if I expand the streets folder here, I have two rules that I can apply, the street modern simple and the street modern standard. And so I want to apply the street modern standard rule to my road right here. And so all I'll do is just drag and drop that rule and apply it onto the road. And so now that I've applied the rule, I can click on it and I'll see that it reveals some of the parameters that the rule allows me to adjust. And so here I can say that I have a number of lanes. I'm going to change this from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. And you can see it adjusts the number of right-hand lanes there to 2 lanes. I'll change it to 4 lanes and that yellow line will adjust again. I can change my center line color in this rule to white or to another color. And I can make a few more adjustments as well. I can do the same thing with the sidewalks. If I click on the sidewalks and I drag and drop the street rule onto those sidewalks as well, and it will do visualization of the sidewalk textures. I'm just going to change the block parameters here back to skeleton subdivision because it's going to make it a little bit weird if I start to generate buildings. But what I can do now with these buildings is I can select the lots here, or I can, to generate buildings, I can select the lots as you see here. And now I'm going to expand the buildings folder and apply the building from footprint rule onto the lots that I've generated. So again, I just drag and drop onto the building lots, and you can see CityEngine very quickly starts to generate buildings that it decides fairly randomly, but also it tries to decide on building shapes and forms that are appropriate to the size of the building lot in itself. So in this case here, you end up with a very dense development, which really isn't realistic to what you would see in real life. But that's just because of the lot structure that I generated there. But if I click on one of these buildings that I've generated, just like I have in the street rule that I applied, I have these parameters that I can start to adjust. And so here I can adjust the building height by dragging it up and down. And you can see as I adjust the building height, CityEngine tries to apply different building textures that it thinks are appropriate to that building height. And I can also change the setbacks, for example, to say that there's only setbacks at the top. And I can change the visualization from realistic to schematic or to just solid color if I wanted to change it just to a solid color building like that. So this is sort of the basics of what CityEngine is like when you start to work with it. Just like I mentioned before as well, I can drag and drop the streets here, and as I drag it, it will start to redraw the buildings because the lots have been adjusted automatically. So this is sort of the basics of what CityEngine looks like. If I wanted to do a little bit more complex work, what I could do is I would use the Get Map Data tool to download a surrounding context for the area that I want to start modeling out. So for example, for this example today, what I want to start to do is model out a scenario for a new development in Toronto. The area is sort of in northern Toronto around Yonge and Steeles, for those of you who are familiar with the city. But the way that I would start to acquire data is there's a built-in tool in CityEngine called the Get Map Data tool. It's a really excellent tool because it allows you to download data very quickly for areas of interest. So I would type in the area of interest that I want to download my data for, click Set Extent. Once I see the area that I want to download, draw a boundary box around that area. I can change my base map type if I wanted to use something other than imagery, so I can have like another sort of underlying base map if I wanted to download here. And then I can change the resolution of the base map as well as the terrain that I'm going to be downloading. So by default, CityEngine downloads high resolution imagery, but if you have the room on your computer and a good enough internet connection, you can download very high resolution imagery as well as very high resolution elevation data. CityEngine also connects to OpenStreetMaps, so you can download street networks and building footprints automatically if that data exists through OpenStreetMaps, and it will add it to your scene. So I'm not going to click OK because this takes a minute or two to download everything, but I've pre-downloaded the data for the area of interest, and this is what it looks like when I've downloaded my data. So you can see here that by default, what CityEngine has done is it's downloaded the building footprints. It has read the values of the height data that comes with OpenStreetMap's attribute data tables. So here, for example, this is one of the buildings that's being redeveloped. It's a shopping mall. You can see that it has extruded the building height to 12 meters, and it's just doing a basic extrusion. If I click on one of these buildings here, this is an apartment building here, it's extruded to 70.3 meters. And if we look down at the bottom here to the object attributes, this is like looking at the attribute table of the data. You can see additional information that OpenStreetMaps provides that you could work with if you have additional information that you want to start to model out. You can see also that the base map that's been downloaded is that aerial imagery, and it's pretty high resolution. And again, that varies depending on the area of the world that you're trying to download data for, and the building footprints also vary quite a lot. So if you're downloading building footprints for major cities, kind of in their core areas, you'll end up with building models that are a lot more detailed usually than what you're seeing here. Like if you're downloading for downtown Toronto, for example, you'll end up with pretty complex looking models for the major buildings in downtown Toronto. But in this case, because we're downloading in a fairly residential area, the buildings that that you're downloading and that you're visualizing are just very basic extrusions like you're seeing here. The streets that have come through also have been created by the rules that and the attributes that are fed into CityEngine's street design tools. And the rule that has been applied has visualized the street lanes as well as the sidewalk widths appropriately based off of the information that has been given. In this case here, it's using the complete street rule set that I spoke about before. And so when you're starting to model out streets with the complete street rule set, you have a lot more capabilities and parameters that you can change within the streets to create a lot more customization. So here, for example, I can say that I want my street to have a bike lane here, and it's going to be 5 meters wide, and it will start to draw in that bike lane. It seems looking the wrong way there. And I can say that the bike lane color is green, just like I did in that demonstration that you saw in PowerPoint. So what I want to do here is start to model out what the redevelopment will look like using CityEngine. So this is what the current existing conditions look like in this area of Toronto right now. But using the scenario development tools, I'm able to create a secondary scenario that turns on a different level of detail and different layers that will delete some of these buildings and then also visualize some of the proposed buildings for the area. So in my assets folder here, in my CityEngine scene, I have previously downloaded 2 of my building development models that I'm going to add to my scene here. And so if I drag and drop this into my scene, you'll see what the building looks like. Just takes a moment to load in. So this is what the model looks like once it loads in here. This is one of the proposed developments just around that area that I'm modeling out. I geo-reference these models ahead of time because it just takes a few minutes sometimes to properly locate it into the scene. But this is what the scenario will look like. This is what the scenario looks like right now. I've created a parking lot layer as well that visualizes the parking in the scene. So you can see it's a really large shopping mall with a lot of parking spaces. So it's a lot of paved area right now in the existing area. And this is what the proposal looks like for what's going to be built in this exact same area. So you can see that the mall has now been torn down. It's been replaced with a very large park. as well as about 20 different condo buildings in the surrounding area on that piece of land. The other 2 buildings that I brought in, or 3 buildings that I brought in, are developments that are just across the street. So there's this tower that's going up across the street from it here, as well as this mid-rise building, or 2 mid-rise buildings that I've loaded in and properly referenced. There's also a whole lot of other condo developments that are being built along Yonge Street here as well, but I haven't loaded them in because this is just for demonstration purposes. So when I load in the buildings, by default, I'll show you what this looks like. This is what it looks like when I bring in my data for what's being built within this area. So when I load in my my building footprints or my 3D models into the scene, and I don't apply any rules to them, this is sort of what it looks like in its most basic form. So if I click on one of these polygons here, you can see that there are object attributes that are associated with it. This is like the data table. And the data is telling us that the type is a building and that there are 12 stories to that building. If I click on one of these other buildings here, you can see, for example, let's do this one. You can see that it's also a building and it's a 40-story building. And here you can see that this one has a type that is a park. So the rule that I'm applying to these buildings is called the building on parcel rule package. And once this rule has been applied, it ends up with a visualization that looks like this. And I can start to change the parameters of what my building looks like very quickly, just based off of the rule that has been applied while it reads in those parameters of the number of stories and the type of building or open space that's being generated. So here, for example, I end up with a building that looks like this, but I can very quickly change this to a much larger building by adjusting the slider here and saying that the building's actually going to be 50 stories tall. I can change the setbacks to say that there are alternating setbacks, which is a bit hard to see there. So a bit more detail. Can't really see the adjustment that I just made there, but it does start to adjust the parameters. I can also change the way that the windows and balconies look here. So I can say that the window and balcony style here is zigzag. And I can alternate the way that that looks. So I end up with like this checkerboard kind of look to my building. I can also say what each of the bays is supposed to be built with. So here, for example, I can say that bay 1 is meant to be a wall instead of a window, and bay 2 is going to be a window instead of a balcony, and bay 3 is going to be another window. And so you can see very quickly how CityEngine's parameters are adjusting the geometry of the building. And so if you were to apply this to your entire scene, you can see how you can generate very quickly different iterations of form just by changing these parameters. There's a whole lot more that you can change here as well as the texturing and the roof style, but I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail with that right now. So once my scene has been generated here, I'm just going to bring this back down to kind of the height that it was supposed to be at. You can start to do some basic analysis just built into CityEngine kind of off the shelf. So you can change the lighting conditions very quickly in CityEngine just by clicking on the scene lighting window here, where you can change the solar angle and elevation. And so you'll see the shadows can change as you change that angle. See there, I can also change my sun position to work based off of the time of the month. So if I wanted to see exactly what the shadow looks like today on May 6th, I can adjust that to the exact day as well as the hour just by changing those parameters in the calendar. You can also do visibility tools, visibility assessments, and you can measure within your scene as well. So just like you can do in other programs, you can click here and you can get measurements of what your dimensions are for the buildings. You can go in 2D as well as 3D very quickly in CityEngine. But I wanted to show some of the visibility tools because this is where it's really interesting to see some of the capabilities of what CityEngine can do once things have been modeled out in different scenarios. So there are different viewshed creation tools here that you can work with in CityEngine itself. And so just by default here, I'm going to use the viewshed creation tool, and I'll click on kind of the top unit of this building here. And I'm going to look kind of this way at the park. So what CityEngine does when I create this viewshed is it shows me that from this point in the building, so I'm like kind of sitting on my balcony in the penthouse unit of this building, this is what the view is going to look like. So everything that's in green that you can see here in the 3D view is what's visible from where I'm standing at that window. So if I'm on the balcony, I would be able to see kind of everything in green there, and everything in red is what's blocked. So what's blocked is like these buildings are blocking that part of the view. And so if I change the height of this building, for example, to 10 meters, you'll see that the visibility changes because now the building view isn't interrupted by that building in front of it. So if you're doing assessments or urban design models and you want to kind of get a good understanding of good visibility, this is a great tool to use because you can see in real time how visibility changes based off of the building heights and locations of things. The other analysis that I can do, the other thing that you can do with the visibility tool that's really interesting is you get this image here that shows you sort of what the view looks like from the point that I've clicked on, but it also shows you the percentage of visibility by layer. So if I'm interested in seeing how much green space I can see, for example, of this park from where I'm standing, I can see here with the visibility tool that 14.4% of my view is comprised of the green space. And so it's really nice to kind of get a good idea then because you have accurate metrics and actual percentages of visibility in your scene based off of the different layers that you've modeled out. Another tool that you can do that's pretty neat is called this one here, which is a view dome creation tool. I'll delete the previous layer. So I create a view dome here. And if I'm standing in the middle of the park, for example, I can create a view dome to see if I'm standing in the middle at this exact point here, how much of my view is visible. So I'm just going to raise it up a little bit. So if I were standing right in the center of the park right there, this is how much, again, is visible from where I'm standing. And just like you could do with the other view, where you kind of get the view from like a condo unit. Here I'm getting a 360 view from where I'm standing. And it's showing me even like where the trees are preventing me from having a certain view just based off of those red lines that are being generated from all the tree points. And so where I'm standing, I can see different parts of the buildings. I have access to, or a clean line of view to different windows and balconies in this building, but they're also severely blocked by some of the trees that are in the middle of the park there. So this is just a nice way also of doing a visual assessment and to see kind of what's entirely around you rather than just from one specific view. The other thing that you can do is called a view corridor. And a view corridor is really good for showing, for example, if I'm clicking again on this kind of unit, this like penthouse unit here, this proposed building, and I want to know what the view is like to this like feature in the middle of the park being like the fountain, for example. I can see here exactly if I have a clean view to that specific feature in the park. And so if this building, for example, changes in height again to say 50 meters, you can see that the view is partially blocked by these buildings here. And so I kind of have like a partial view or a partially obstructed view to that fountain. So again, using the view creation tools, I can very quickly start to do an analysis of what my view would look like and where it is blocked if I were to move and start to adjust my buildings in urban form. So you can see there I have a completely blocked view now because the building is now in the way, and I can see exactly where in the building it is creating that blockage. So if I were to decrease the height of this building to 20 stories, for example, you can see now my view isn't blocked anymore. So once I've created my model that you see here, I can publish it into ArcGIS Online. The way that I would do that is just by selecting all of my models. So I would drag a box around all of the models that I've generated, say export models, and then I'd export to an Esri scene layer package. From there, I would publish it online once it has generated the scene layer package. So this is what it looks like once the model has been published online. Once you've published the model online, you have access to a lot of the, or all of the ArcGIS Online scene viewer capabilities. And so one of the really nice things that you can do with the scene viewer is you can start to adjust the lighting conditions and the shadow, just like you saw in CityEngine there. But you can also create weather conditions, which is really nice. So if you wanted to create a little bit more realism in your scene, and this is really great for when you're taking these models to community consultation and showing them to different stakeholders who have a great understanding of the neighborhood that things are being developed in. It's really nice to model out different weather conditions because it creates a little bit more realism in what the scene can look like. And we can even do snow and see snow cover on the buildings and on the different surfaces. And so this is actually like a really nice way of showing seasonality in your scenes, which is something that is very difficult to do in 3D modeling usually. The other thing that you can do in CityEngine very quickly is with that same export capabilities here, you can export your model to a 360 VR experience. When you go through the steps here to click this and to export your views, you end up with a output that looks like this, which is a webinar. In this case, I've called it webinar demo scene VR.3VR file. This 3VR file can be published also into ArcGIS Online, and this is what it ends up looking like. So if you have a VR headset, you can be completely immersed in a 360 view of the scene that I've generated here. The VR experience is a static view, so you can't walk through, but what you can do is jump to different bookmarks. So I've created 2 different bookmarks in my scene here, where I can switch between the bookmarks as well as the different scenarios. So here, this is like what I call the current conditions scenario, where I'm just getting like this bird's eye view, and I can switch it to proposed conditions to see what the new development will look like. But I can also switch it to this bookmarked view here, where I'm sitting in the middle of the parking lot at the existing mall and parking pad at Young and Steeles there, and I can change to proposed conditions. And again, I can see now what the changes are going to be. So I'm now standing in the middle of a park with all these tall buildings around me. So it's a very different sort of experience that I can jump between by switching between these 2 different tabs and bookmarks. So it's very easy to publish, as you can see, both into Scene Viewer and ArcGIS Online, as well as into a VR experience. If you want to download more rules and kind of different things that you can apply to your models, a great way to do that is to go to the help menu here and to click to download tutorials and examples. Here you can download a whole lot of different what we call scenes or projects in CityEngine that are pre-created just to kind of test out and to see things in different ways. And so here, for example, is a medieval city you can download. You can download kind of like an apocalyptic city here. You can download city of like futuristic New York. And when you download all of these scenes, the really nice thing is that you're not only getting a scene, but you're getting all of the rules that go with that scene. So once you've downloaded all of those projects and you expand one of those projects that you've downloaded and go to the rules folders here, you can see that there are all of these different rules that come with all of the scenes that you downloaded that you're now free to apply to your projects as well. And so Esri provides these rules through their projects for free, and you have full capabilities of utilizing them for your own use, as well as editing them if you decide that you want to edit the rules and get to get a better understanding of the CGA scripting language. So to edit that rule, I've just double click on the CGA file, and then I see all of the scripting language revealed here, and I can start to make adjustments to my rule and create customizations of the rules that have been pre-downloaded in my scene. The last thing I want to show here is at Esri Canada's Education and Research Group, we've created a website here called the 3D City Model Resources website, where we've supplied a whole lot of different rules as well that are free to download and use for your own liking. And you can see here previews of what each of those rules does. So here, this one, for example, generates a building shell. This one generates a log cabin. Some of these rules are created by Esri Canada. Some of them you can see are created by Esri Inc. We've just created a collection of them that we found online. In addition to the rules that you can download, we also have links to download different 3D models or assets that you can add into your models automatically, as well as different textures that you can download to apply to your models if you wanted to apply, for example, different dirt textures or grass textures to different surfaces. Finally, we have links to a whole lot of different tutorials that are applicable to kind of the urban modeling and CityEngine industries. So here you can click on all the different tutorials that we've provided, links to different videos, as well as additional resources. And you can see different proceedings from the Esri Geodesign Summit, where one actually just happened, I think, a month or two ago. And so if you click on these links, you can see some of the previous videos and presentations from those from that conference. So this is the link to the 3D City Model website. I'll just leave it up on the screen here. And I think with that, I'll just go to Kendra to see if there are any questions that have come up during this presentation, because I know there's a sort of a whole lot that I've covered in a very short amount of time. And so I'm sure that if there's some questions, I can answer them now, or otherwise you're always free to send an email to me with questions as a follow-up.
Yeah, it looks like there's nothing in the Q&A currently. Everyone, if you do have a question, please feel free to share, and we can answer it in these last few minutes.
Sure. Yeah, so if there are no more questions, I just wanted to thank you all for attending today. I'll send out links to some of the content that I've shown to all of you following this webinar. But you can also please feel free to send us an email. Through the email that I'll send as a follow-up to everyone, you have my direct email address, so you can feel free to ask us any questions that you may have about CityEngine. In the Education and Research Group, we're very happy to answer any questions that you may have from the academic or educational standpoint of utilizing the software. If you have questions that are related to commercial use of CityEngine, you can feel free to email me as well, and I'll direct you to the right person who can answer those questions, either on the sales or on the consulting side of things. But I just want to thank you all for attending today, and I'll hang around until 2 o'clock if there are any other questions, but I just want to wish you all a great day.